Hi, hello. I am here at the open-ended space. This is the first time I'm going live, and I don't know who is going to come today, if some of the participants or maybe some member of the public. I will be, in absence of people, I've got a little list of things to do for this session here. I've been given a link to a podcast to listen about perceptions of menstruation and endometriosis, which I'm curious to listen. That will be, half an hour long. After that, I wanted to do some research about the Scuola of Reggio Emilia, which is a school in Italy based on creative conversations, philosophical approaches, and I was quite interested in that. Maybe to feed it into this practice based on dialogue, and if not, just to educate myself a little bit more on this type of approach. And then another thing I was curious to read and to research a little bit, it was Platon. So maybe that's going to be something I might be doing. But I want to remain quite open and fluid in the event that someone will join later on. Yeah, maybe there is going to be some making process. Probably, we'll see. Maybe something will come from the listening of this podcast. So the podcast, it's run by Podcast at Manchester Met. I'm gonna share the screen. That's it. That should be it. So this is the link I was given. This podcast was made. Oh, fantastic! They've also got the episode transcript. Yeah, I'm gonna start just listening to it, and let's see what happened later on.
Hello and welcome to the RAB podcast at Manchester Metropolitan University. My name's Ellie Beale. This episode will explore perceptions of menstruation and endometriosis. In particular, we will ask, why is it such a taboo? How can education help to break down the taboo and encourage equality? And how do the expectations put on women's social roles contribute to medical responses to endometriosis? We will speak to Rosie Jackson about perceptions of menstruation in history and how the taboo could have first arisen.
The power of one woman menstruating can cause death on an unprecedented scale.
Then I'll speak to Stella Bullough and Zoe Bibbin about how the language we use to talk about menstruation and endometriosis affects how they're considered in medical discourse and how education might begin to solve the problem.
How are they going to know that their pain is not normal when we grow up in a culture where we are taught that women are supposed to suffer some level of pain?
Finally, I'll speak to Jenny Cole about women's experiences of living with endometriosis and how social expectations often lead to misdiagnosis and misunderstanding.
Oh, it's just period pains.
You can join the conversation on Twitter by hashtagging #ra_podcast. And today I'm joined by Rosie Jackson, who is a PhD candidate, but she also teaches here at Manchester Metropolitan. Welcome, Rosie.
Thank you.
I mean, your research sounds fascinating, and it covers quite a broad range of constructions of the women's body.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you just start off by telling us a little bit about how menstruation specifically fits within that.
So my research focuses, sort of widely speaking, on the actual rhetoric that surrounds the female body and the way that male authors try and construct female bodies, specifically within their cultures and their environments. So what I found is that there's massively different ways of talking about the female body in, say, 5th century Athens to 1st century Rome, depending on what the men in those situations require of women. And I'm really focusing on the shift from Rome towards a Christian era and how the arrival of Christianity as a religion does change this rhetoric. And I suppose the first thing to start with really there would be the centrality of the Genesis story and Eve. Good old Eve.
Good old
Poor Eve. So as we all know, one of Eve's curses is to suffer in childbirth, and Adam has to suffer working all the days of his life. And for the early Christian authors, this is also taken to extend to menstrual pains. So this is viewed as being something that's part of the curse of Eve, and it's a kind of monthly reminder that you are a woman, and because you're a woman, you're responsible in some way for the original fall from a state of grace. And this is something that is strangely echoed in non-Christian literature, because what we find with the Greek and the Roman authors is that there's this strange juxtaposition of menstruation, because on the one hand, it's a demonstration physically that women are lesser than men. But on the other hand, because it's such a direct physical representation of the female ability to bear children, it's something that's actually to be feared. So I think the best example of this is probably one of my favourites, which comes from a 1st century Roman author called Pliny the Elder. And in the 28th book, he gives us this analysis of menstruation. And he says that it's wild and mysterious and full of power. And then states that he clearly knows that menstrual blood can cause men to go mad and dogs to kill themselves. He says that it turns crops into dust and that harvests will fail. He says that it causes gold to turn rusty, although I have since been told that menstrual blood actually can physically affect that. So that's one thing.
It can actually turn metal to rust.
Apparently.
Well, it's one of our secret powers.
Secret power.
A particularly useless one. But
well, it gets better, because apparently it can also change the direction of the winds, which affects the flow of the sea, which means that ships can crash. So the power of one woman menstruating can cause death on an unprecedented scale.
It's catastrophic, apparently.
Yes.
So we only wish we had that power.
I know. I mean, it's fascinating to me because he's going on about how terrible and dangerous women are, and he's by far not the only author to say this. But at the same time, menstruation is something that makes women weak. So from the moment of conception, menstrual blood is something that's really central to women. It defines you as lesser, and it defines your role in life as lesser because you're a childbearer. You're not a politician or a philosopher. And you have these authors trying to somehow fix the two things together and say, well, women are lesser, but also this gives them great power. And for me, I think that this is rooted in fears regarding childbirth. So one thing that Roman and Greek men have in common is this constant fear that their children are not their own. And this gives women a kind of power over men. So menstruation, again, is linking into childbirth and is linking into this power that women have over men. So the response to this is to try and denigrate it and really force it down, push it as something that's weak, and it makes you inferior. And one thing Pliny says as well is that if you have sex with your wife while she is menstruating, you will die.
Yes.
Yes.
But that's definitely something that is kind of cross-cultural.
Within Judaism, it's very different. And I do think there's kind of a bit of a general misunderstanding about the Leviticus codes and what they specifically prohibit. So while there's this separation, it's in relation to what's sacred, and specifically places where sacrifices are going on. Sacrifices involve blood. Menstruation involves blood. Menstruation is a blood with power. Sacrificial blood is a blood with power. At this point, it seems to vary by community as to what happens. I mean, it's still divided today. If you look at a lot of different groups of subsects of Catholicism, Protestantism, Baptists, there are still vastly differing opinions about what you should do during menstruation. And it's the same with Judaism.
Yeah, that's fascinating, I imagine. Is any of it related to that other iconic woman of Christianity, which is Mary?
The early Christian authors differ widely on what they think about Mary, partly because there is a big sort of split between authors who think that Mary herself has some sort of immaculate conception and people who think that she was just human. Where it does start to become interesting is sort of the 11th century onwards in actual iconography. In the 1st century AD, we meet a guy called Soranus, who's a Roman doctor who writes extensively on women. And Soranus, again, picks up on the idea that Aristotle says, which is that menstrual blood forms the child in the womb. And he also believes that after birth, menstrual blood is somehow converted into breast milk. Lots of medieval imagery shows Mary with one breast on display feeding Jesus. And so for these groups of communities who think that menstrual blood is inherently connected to the actual physical flesh of the child and the breast milk, what you're getting there are these really fascinating images in which the child that Mary's holding, which is divine, is also made of her flesh, and she's feeding it her own blood, which is a very weird reading of what we've got earlier on with the idea that menstrual blood is very negative, because here it's what's made Jesus, who is the Lord and Saviour, and it's what continues to sustain him after birth. And this then starts to have wider ramifications with the images that we get of Christ on the cross, bleeding, with Mary at his feet. He's shedding blood, and it's her blood.
It makes me think of the Eucharist again, the idea of kind of consumption of blood, and also that sort of very graphic kind of Catholic iconography, especially of saints drinking or licking blood from the wounds of Christ as he's at the crucifixion, which has been discussed in terms of kind of both eroticism, but also the kind of wound-like linking to kind of vaginal imagery and things like this as well. So they all seem to somehow be in conversation.
Oh, yes. I mean, blood for the early Christians is the most central symbol. When you read the martyrdom narrative acts, they are so focused on blood. The blood has to be there because it shows life. Where it gets really interesting for me in my research is from the 3rd century onwards, when we get the rise of virginity as a way of life. So large numbers of young women are consecrating their virginity, dedicating it to Christ. And these women are not producing children, but at the same time, they are always talked about as being mothers, in the sense that they're mothers of all Christian believers. They also represent the church, which is a mother. They represent Mary, who is a mother. And through their pastoral care of other virgins and other Christians in their community, they're spiritual mothers. And where this is interesting for me is the fact that in the middle of all that, you've got the fact that these women will still be menstruating. So where does this tie into this whole idea of what motherhood actually means? And certainly because these women are also described as being living martyrs. So they're making this big sacrifice, which enables them to become closer to Jesus, who's also a virgin, and blood is so necessary for sacrifice that I wonder if there's any potential we can start to look at that menstrual blood as being sacrificial in some way in this context. Menstruation is a marker of femininity in the ancient world. Shortly after we get consecrated virgins, we start to get the rise of people called ascetics. And one aspect of this is restricting your intake of food massively. And one of the things that happens if you're a woman and you starve yourself is that menstruation stops. And with these women also losing huge amounts of weight, what tends to happen is that general secondary sex characteristics start to disappear.
In some way, it plays into sacrifice, though, doesn't it? Actually, that idea, I guess, is another form of sacrifice, specifically female sacrifice, that they give up their ability to reproduce, that they give up the menstrual cycle, that they give up their breasts, is a form of sacrifice, isn't it?
We've got this case which from Hippocrates, the Greek doctor, and it's about a woman called Phaethusa. And her husband is exiled for some reason. And as a result of this, she stops menstruating. And she becomes extremely ill, and the doctors decide that what they need to do is induce menstruation, and this will cause her to become cured. But the root of it for me is that the only thing the doctors try and think to do is introduce menstruation, because menstruation is viewed as being so central to your body, and that's why women have to have regular sexual intercourse, because it's believed that sexual intercourse heats up menstrual blood and allows it to move around your body, and thus you have better circulation and you have more regular periods. Although ideally you wouldn't have any at all because you'd be permanently pregnant. But it is interesting.
I just have this sort of imagery of women sort of like running around fields with their blood circulating so that they can get pregnant quicker, and all sorts of images coming from that.
Oh, it's bizarre, the things that are suggested that you have to do. It's, you have to eat garlic that's raw, and you have to drink these mixtures of hot honey with acid added. You need to sort of rub these substances up your nose. You need to put things inside your vagina, and this will somehow increase it. But the main answer it always comes back to is if you're not menstruating, you need to have sex, and that will somehow cause you to menstruate.
One of the things that struck me about that last story, though, was that the idea of that somehow still menstruation is linked in some way to women's emotional worlds, whether they're grieving, anything sort of highly emotional, whether they're somehow linked. And I've always found that to be fascinating. I wondered, because it is something that still survives very much today.
For the Roman and the Greek, there very much is. The idea is that if menstrual blood does have these, as Pliny says, the strange and mysterious powers, The idea is that it's also something that women don't have total control over. Therefore, if it's not coming out of you, it's pooling in you. And the more menstrual blood you have in you, the less in control that you'll be of your emotions. The most perfect way would be for you to be pregnant, because the menstrual blood is still in a way inside you, but it's in the form of a child. For much of the late antique stuff, we don't really have discussions of this, partially because it does become much more limited to what's allowed to be discussed in the public sphere with regards to rules dictating how you talk about women's bodies. Modesty and chastity are now far more significant than they are within earlier Roman periods.
And I suppose maybe that there is this direct link between our Christian heritage and the way in which we do or do not speak around the topic of menstruation.
Oh no, I'd certainly agree, because one of the issues that it is in early Christianity is that it is something that is taboo, and it is something that is partially impure. It's not something that should be talked about because it is, again, women's curse. This kind of lack of discussion we have does go back to these roots of it's taboo, it's dangerous. And even now you think about the discourse that goes on around it. If you look at something like Twitter and you look at the way that menstruation and periods are spoken about, it's often extremely sexist. And there's this idea that it's this gross blood that's a bit weird. And there's a lack of an understanding about how it functions as well. In terms of, there was a tweet that went around a while ago with a man saying, well, sanitary towels are so expensive, why can't you just hold it in until you go to the bathroom?
I remember
Which
that.
it's very funny, but it's terrifying.
Thank God he wasn't older.
It's the same thing as what's going on in ancient Greece and Rome with men who don't know what goes on inside the female body, and are just sort of making these wild inferences from what they can know from the outside, and therefore assuming that this is how it works and this is how it must be understood and it must be taken. And it links also very well to virginity and the young age of women at marriage. So lots of the Greek doctors seem to think that sexual intercourse will somehow enable women to menstruate. So you have to marry a girl when she's young, because that first intercourse will enable menstruation. But again, it links back to this patriarchal idea of male control over the female body in terms of men explaining to women what menstruation is and how to deal with it while not understanding, and also ensuring male control throughout the female life cycle from the age where you hit puberty all the way through your life.
Thank you very much, Rosie. That was
welcome.
A fascinating discussion. We will be talking to Stella Bullough and Zoe Bibbon, who are running the project, The Language of Endometriosis. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to start off then just with a quick question of what this is.
Okay, well, endometriosis is a gynecological condition that affects many women. There are talks of it affecting around 1 in 10 women. It's a condition whereby tissue that resembles the lining of the womb grows in other areas outside the womb and behaves like the lining of the womb. So that means that every month that tissue bleeds. But because it's positioned in various parts of the body, obviously the blood doesn't leave the body and creates various manifestations such as adhesions or create cysts. One of the most common consequences of that is that women are in an extreme amount of pain. Depending on where it's positioned, it causes different types of pain or different consequences. For some women, it's not that much pain, but it causes other issues, or in the worst of cases, it causes both. But because it is associated with a natural cycle, which is the menstrual cycle, some women find it difficult to explain what it is, how they feel, and most importantly, sometimes they feel that they're not heard or they're not asked or elicited the right questions to determine what it is with them. We believe that one of the big issues with this diagnosis delay, which takes an average of 7.5 years worldwide, is that one of the big deficiencies when it comes to endometriosis is the communication, is how we talk about pain, how when we seek help in the first place, and then when we do seek help, how do we explain what's happening to us, and how successful is communication when it comes to endometriosis.
And what types of findings are they? Is it a matter of, medical practitioners or whoever asking the right questions or having the right information? Or is it a case of, as well, of women being more informed about what is an expected level of pain, a sort of natural or sort of normal level of pain when it comes to a menstrual cycle, and what is like prolonged or abnormal?
Well, we started the project by interviewing women. The results the findings are very consistent throughout the sample, indicating that, well, it's in this distinction between normal and abnormal pain that the problem tends to reside. If somebody has had the condition forever, how are they going to know that their pain is not normal? When we grow up in a culture where we are taught that women are supposed to suffer some level of pain, we bring other discourses such as giving birth and that kind of thing, and we're told that periods do hurt anyway, and that has been one of the main findings from our study, which has actually shaped Zoe's PhD. Zoe has been working as a research assistant in the project for a while now.
A very common thread between the first group of women that we interviewed was that a lot of them talked about how they started experiencing severe symptoms at very young ages, 13, 14, around the time that they started their periods. And this would be when they were at school. And a lot of them talked about how they really struggled to talk to anyone about what they were going through. And they felt very isolated and embarrassed and ashamed to talk about their gynecological health, because it's not something that we're really told is okay to discuss in public. And we heard a lot of stories about how, even trying to talk to school nurses about it, or teachers, or at home, that it would just be met with, it's okay, it's just normal, it's just part of your, cycle, it's something that you can't really do anything about. Take an ibuprofen and you'll be fine.
And lack of sympathy.
Exactly, a real lack of sympathy, and just this real normalization of something that really shouldn't be that way. Why is it that we talk about women's health in this way? Why are we not allowed to express our concerns? Why are we kind of told this is something that you just have to live with? And why is there nowhere to go and seek help when you do think something's wrong? And I think a really big thing that came up is that there's just not enough education around it in schools. So that's where my research comes in. I'm looking to understand how and when people are first kind of taught about menstruation, to try and find out, where does this language taboo come from? Where does this inability to express ourselves when it comes to women's health come from? What are your sexual health, educational sessions like? And are boys included, for example? Because I think that's a really big thing. If boys aren't included, then maybe that's already the beginning of the whole secrecy around women's health and gynecological health, because it's something that we're told from a very young age is you should hide it.
I think historically, for most women's experiences, if it is ever talked about, it's only talked about at home with your female parent.
What Zoe's saying is also resonating with something I have come across recently as well. Endometriosis can also lead to infertility later in life. And I recently met somebody whose wife has endometriosis. So out of curiosity, I asked him if he thought that endometriosis had some sort of impact on their relationship. So I think that the way in which endometriosis affects men is also something worth exploring, and the impact it has in a relationship, and exploring this with a view to helping men also develop tools to help women through episodes of endometriosis pain. And
pain is, notoriously a hard subject to talk about, but also how do you express to somebody what you need in times of extreme pain?
And that has actually become the main strand of my research at the moment, that focuses on the communication of endometriosis pain. Pain is a very vague word that is used in a variety of ways. So when you say I'm in pain, people may not necessarily understand the amount of pain you're in. My current strand of research is based on pain descriptors, on the ways in which pain is communicated, and with a view to developing linguistic tools that will aid the description and the elicitation of the severity of pain and the types of pain that women go through.
A big issue that we've faced is that women talk about how, when you have a chronic invisible illness, that there's a lot of disbelief around, well, how much pain are you actually in? And it's not really until you start exploring all the different sort of metaphorical uses that women use to try and get people to understand what what type of pain they're in.
So the expression of pain, for instance, is something you need to do, and yet you're distanced from a language that allows you to do it, because you have to still skirt around the topic of what you're actually talking about, because it is a taboo topic.
Yeah, it's almost like a sanitized version. And that's something that comes up repeatedly in my reading at the moment, is that anything to do with menstruation is sanitized through language and imagery. Because if you think about adverts for what the word is in itself, sanitary products, it's always women wearing white and, you know, on white bed sheets, and it's just kind of invokes this idea of cleanliness.
Extra clean, and extra fresh, and extra white.
And it's also in the name of the products and the way that they describe them, like for extra protection and, you know, for peace of mind and all this stuff that's constantly reinforcing the idea that we have to keep that side of us hidden at all times, because God forbid someone sees or notices that you're on your period. And the use of anything red, there is never anything red. So it's really interesting how, when you start looking at all these different facets of society, how there's just a real lack of just anything around periods and just letting women talk about what's really going on.
I once had this fabulous friend at school who I envied more than anything, because at the age of sort of 14 or 15, she used to stick her tampon in her mouth like a cigar to walk to the toilets at school. You know, pain's not really something you discuss at school or with children at that age, because we're still trying to think of them as sort of particularly innocent beings who don't need to know about the troubles of the world yet, and certainly not the troubles of your own body.
Yeah. I think a difficult thing is that our society finds it very difficult to separate menstrual health from sex. People are afraid because they think, well, girls, you know, who start their periods, that you know, they're now fertile, they can have children. But then it links back to what we were saying before. Women are always viewed as baby makers, and you know, that's why when it comes to, you know, oh, you've actually got a problem conceiving, we should look into that. When all the years before that, when you were saying to someone, I'm in so much pain that I can't get up in the morning and go and do my job or go to school, that they just ignored. We need to separate women from sex. And I think there's also a lot of misinformation. I think it was a few years ago when NICE came out with new guidelines, and it was literally listen to women, and it was for healthcare professionals to actually listen to women. And it was just so bizarre to me that it's taken this long for them to realise, you know, women are being underserved in the medical community because people aren't listening to them.
So how do we empower women to deal with the consequences of a condition that they don't know they have? That's the big question for us to ask. And I think that the answer is going back to what we were saying in the beginning, is education.
Thank you ever so much for coming in. That's been really, really interesting to listen to both of you, and I've learned absolutely loads as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much for listening. You can find us on Twitter at EndoLanguage if you want to stay up to date with our project.
I will be talking to Dr. Jennifer Cole, who works here at Manchester Metropolitan in the area of social psychology and body image. And Jennifer is going to be talking to us a little bit more about her current research into endometriosis. So hello, Jennifer.
Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to be here.
So what was it that attracted you to this particular topic?
One of the things that strikes me about this particular condition is that often the research sort of looks at it as if it's in a social vacuum.
Right.
So it looks at very medicalised perspectives of the pain experience, which is very important. But there's a whole other layer that the women with endometriosis have to exist in the world.
Right.
And that there's a social psychological aspect to this experience, which no one had really looked at. So some of the recent data we've been looking at suggests that a lot of the expectations of what a woman is and what women do feeds into how women with endometriosis kind of manage their condition, and the choices that they make about treatment and adherence to treatment, because they're trying to negotiate all their other obligations. And often women do have a wider range of obligations. It's often expected that women will be responsible for childcare and domestic duties and things like that. And all of those additional things alongside, you know, work and things like that, are much harder to manage with the chronic pain that goes along with endometriosis.
So some of the things that you are looking at then are the way in which the more kind of complex or demanding roles that women take in society feeds into the kind of types of treatment they get, how seriously their illnesses are received.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the things that women reported they've been told by doctors when they presented with symptoms were things like, oh, it's just period pains. You just have to get used to it. This is just what happens, and not really taking their pain seriously.
How much is this a problem about sort of gender, do you think?
Because we haven't got a sort of direct comparison, because endometriosis is so tied up with a woman's reproductive function, which is obviously very different to a man's, it's really difficult to compare and contrast and say, well, this would be treated differently if it was in a man. I know there's recently been some suggestion that, for example, in cardiac conditions, that the way that women present to doctors with cardiac conditions is very different to how men present, and therefore often women are missing out on treatment and diagnosis as a result. So we've got that sort of linked evidence to suggest that that could also be happening in endometriosis, that by virtue of the fact of how women's pain is considered and how women are expected to sort of get on with things is maybe meaning that their treatment is different to how a man would be treated, but we don't have that direct comparison, so it's actually quite hard to say.
Do you think that sort of women are so used to not having their voices taken seriously as well, they just tend to get on with things without talking about it?
I think there is a general perception that to be a woman is to experience pain. And so if women internalise those messages, then they might start to think, well, this is just normal. But actually women were telling us how they were going to the doctor and presenting in extreme pain, really trying to be taken seriously and still not being taken seriously. One of the themes in our research is women thinking that they were going mad.
Right.
That started to doubt their own sanity. Well, I must be a hypochondriac then, because I'm going to the doctor and I'm talking about this pain. I'm not minimising it. I'm not getting on with it. I'm making it very clear how important this is, and still no one's taking me seriously. So there must be something wrong with me. I must be mental.
How much of this do you think is sort of attributed to the fact that lots of people don't know what endometriosis is?
I think that's huge, yeah, absolutely. One of the themes in our research is that women would hide or not tell people that they had endometriosis because people don't really understand it. So rather than try and express and explain what endometriosis was and why it was impacting on their lives so seriously, and the women would just not bother, just hide their symptoms, which meant that then therefore it's taken less seriously as a result. It's kind of a vicious circle.
Yeah. And it does always seem to add to like layers and layers of it being missed or misdiagnosed as well, doesn't it? Because the wider society doesn't really know what it is.
I think our longest period between symptom onset and diagnosis was 23 years.
Oh my gosh.
For one of our participants. In fact, a few were sort of 10, 20 years. So for all that time, it had been missed. And it's not always easy to identify why. It can only really be diagnosed through surgical procedures. And with the NHS as stretched as it is, it's not going to be ordering surgical procedures unless there's sort of an indication that that's probably worthwhile. And it's not always easy to tell what's going on with that chronic pain.
Mm-hmm. Is there something that women and endometriosis are not thought as being important enough to operate, to spend money on? Is that part of the problem as well?
Oh, that'll definitely play a part, I'm sure. And there's a general taboo around reproductive function, around menstruation, that means that women are often a bit embarrassed to push these sorts of things as well. And women don't really talk in detail necessarily about how they experience menstruation. And so then women don't get to necessarily find out what is normal menstruation.
Mm-hmm. So all those sort of layers of sort of social taboo work against it as well. So how did your research kind of take shape?
So we had quite a long survey with lots of open-ended questions so the women could really take their time to tell their story. So we've looked at it from the point of view of what health practitioners maybe need to be looking out for, but we've also looked at it from the point of view of the taboos around bodies and how that may be impacting on diagnosis, and also how the social consequences of endometriosis cause almost as much distress as the physical ones. This impacts on their life in lots of different ways. One of the big ones was about fertility and having children. So there's the not being able to have a child when you might want to, but also women were talking about how they'd failed as a woman. So sometimes doctors would actually suggest having children to fix endometriosis.
Right, okay.
You'd better have kids quick.
Right, okay.
Which was when someone was presenting, with endometriosis symptoms when they were 18, 19, they're not particularly helpful.
No, not at all.
I think a lot of it does come from those wider assumptions about what a woman is.
One of the areas I guess that women find barriers and find misunderstanding is in their job places.
And I think a lot of people working with endometriosis charities and things like that would be very positive about a step towards recognising conditions like endometriosis as protected characteristics, even if we have very understanding employers. For some women with very severe symptoms, that may not even be enough.
The kind of storytelling process of this, the getting the message out there, the story out there, will help in terms of, creating things like more funding. It's something that seems to be so misunderstood and so overlooked. It can't be getting the medical focus that it really needs.
I think there is change happening in terms of awareness, and it'll take a while for that to translate into funding and medical change. I've seen a few stand-up shows and things like that recently, since starting this work, actually, focused on endometriosis. We're actually looking at the storytelling aspect of it. I think if you just see a list of symptoms, then people go, oh, that doesn't sound very nice, okay, and they can move on. But reading the stories of women with endometriosis, I think, has a different impact.
It's hard to ignore.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming to visit us, Jennifer.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to this RAR podcast on women's health, where we have been exploring why health issues unique to women, such as menstruation, reproduction, and the frequently debilitating and painful illness endometriosis, are such a taboo. Early Christian perceptions of the female body have been imaginative, if not always accurately conceived. What is missing from these philosophical and theological accounts are women's experiences of menstruation and their body. Not much has changed in the 21st century, and that the historical lack of research on women's health concerns has compromised the quality of healthcare and information received by women today. Jenny's investigation into women's stories suggests that the larger expectation of women to cope with pain and to carry out professional and domestic tasks in spite of pain makes them more susceptible to having their health overlooked. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter for future podcast updates. You can find us at MMU_RA. For more information on all the research and events we discuss in this episode, please go to the RA website for full links. Tune back in soon for more episodes. This episode was produced by Lucy Simpson, edited by Max Munster, mixed by Julian Holloway, and presented by Ellie Beale.
Yeah, that was quite interesting to listen to. I wasn't diagnosed with endometriosis, but I suffered one particular episode of very severe pain, and I went through a doctor appointment and gynecological appointment, and it was thought that endometriosis could have been a cause. We've looked into it through scanning, but as the only way to see if there is effective actually endometriosis is through laparoscopy, which is a very invasive surgery. They basically cut you in the belly and they stick a camera quite thin and long down to the uterus to see if there is actually endometriosis tissue somewhere else. That's very invasive, and I don't know, I didn't feel the need to do this experiment here in this moment, because I don't believe I've got it. It's a very, very complicated and delicate topic to discuss, and we will see at Wombenhood if we're going to be able to discuss about this topic with some people as well, because I think this is a very, very, very important point to look at. Before, I was looking at imageries of Christianity and about the Virgin and the relationship between menstrual blood that transforms into milk. And I think this is it seems that this part of the veil of the dress is actually blood. I thought it was like that, but yeah, maybe this is not. In any case, I'm blabbering a little bit. Right, I took some notes. It's interesting. I was looking at the curse. Why was the word curse started to be used in relation to menstruation? And this podcast, it was quite interesting to see the origins from Eve's. So the Christianity and the beginning of the world and humanity. So the curses of Eve were to suffer birth pain and the curse of menstruation. Quite funny is how they believe that the menstruation could change the weather, and causes incidents in the sea because of women being menstruating, changing the tides and all of that. Right, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen a moment. I think I'm gonna pause a second and have a look at the emails to see if someone is joining, and then I'll restart in a moment. Right, as in this moment no one has joined the conversation, I was thinking to do a few minutes break. I'm gonna make myself a coffee and then I'm going to look at the Scuola of Reggio Emilia, which is something I was very curious to study, to understand for implementing my practice. And in general, I was very curious. So I'll see you back in a few minutes. Here I am again with my lovely coffee. Right, I'm gonna share the screen once more. Here I am. So before I was looking for La Scuola di Reggio Emilia, which was quoted in a book I'm reading. Oh, you can see the book. It's Education for Socially Engaged Art by Pablo Helguera. I'm going to just take a screenshot and put it in the links of resources for this session here. I'm gonna put a note actually. And I was very interested. So I was very interested in this type of education because Helguera, he was discussing a lot about how important it is for artists working in a social manner with people to understand education tools and communication tools, not to become educators, but to just understand the importance of this knowledge in a practice which is socially engaged. And I thought to just study a little bit more. So I've never watched any of these videos, so I'm not sure how good or bad they're going to be. But this is an exploration we can do together.
Reggio philosophy began in 1963 in the municipality of Reggio Emilia in northern Italy. The Reggio Emilia approach allows children to utilize their unique perspective to explore their environment, using their choice of expression to communicate their feelings and ideas. This approach has yielded a higher level of creativity from children than the more directed educational approaches. The Reggio Emilia philosophy is based upon the following set of principles. Children have some control over the direction of their learning. Each child is able to utilize their sense of touch, feeling, listening, and observing to explore and learn. Children learn to build relationships with other children and with material items in their environment. And there are endless ways and opportunities for the children to express themselves. The Reggio Emilia principles are as follows. 1. Environmental stimulation allows children to engage with their environment and learn through the natural world. 2. The 100 languages of expressions. Reggio Emilia recognizes that different children have different needs and are best educated in different forms. 3. Involvement in long-term projects. The opportunity to take on long-term projects that explore the children's open-ended questions and curiosities. And 4. Community and parental involvement. Adults are aware of and ready to assist the children in their learning process. The Reggio Emilia approach assists children in becoming young adults who engage in actively stimulating their education and growth. Through the process of utilizing their senses, environment, and the adults around them, the children learn to become social, respectful, and most important of all, active participants in their education. This learning process is determined by the collaboration of the children and teachers in a co-learning and respectful approach. The focus is on the children's education being group-centered and social, an open-ended and expressive process that is flexible and fluid. Reggio Emilia classroom walls are filled with documents of the children's exploration experiences, conversations, and visual expressions. The various documentations are used as a tool to stimulate reflection by the children, parents, and teachers. Parkland Players was established in 1995. The center has been successfully following the Reggio Emilia approach for the past 20 years. The ultimate goal at Parkland Players is to provide an environment where a child can experience and learn from while following these main guiding principles: collaboration, communication, relationship building, provocation, and the 100 languages of children. Over the past year, Parkland Players has been improving the facility and atmosphere to enable the center to properly follow the Reggio Emilia approach. By rebuilding the structure of the center and implementing technology where it was required, increasing time by minimizing administrative work has allowed management to focus on educating their staff on the approach of learning through activities, completing the educational manual known as 100 Languages of Experience that provides a vast number of activities focusing on children's domains of learning. Parkland Players engages the parents to be involved in their children's education by providing them with daily and weekly reports, allowing a transparent window to the child's growth and development.
Right. In my personal experience, this is very much resembling the Waldorf school, the Waldorfschule. I went into the Waldorf school from age 4 till 15 in Sicily. So the Waldorf school is a school created by Rudolf Steiner. I want us to see the comparison between the two, if there is anything, or actually I'm going just to search about the Waldorf school. Oops. Because it's absolutely pertinent in my personal experience. I can see so many similarities in this way of education. So let's see. Maybe this one here.
Hi there, welcome to Sunday with Sarah. I'm Sarah Baldwin, and today I want to try to answer the question, what is Waldorf education in a nutshell? People always ask this question if they've never heard of Waldorf. They want to know briefly what it is. It's so hard to describe it in a nutshell because I've been studying Waldorf education for 20 years and been involved for that long. And it's so deep and multi-level. There's so much to be said. But I'll try to give you just 5 examples of things that make Waldorf education unique. And being an early childhood teacher myself, first thing I want to tell you about is that in early childhood, nursery and kindergarten, it's a non-academic preschool environment. So we're not teaching numbers or math or the alphabet or reading. However, children are building those pre-math and pre-reading skills through hearing stories, fairy tales, doing circle games, enriched language. They're hearing poetry and memorizing it. They're hearing it through repetition. So they're building these big vocabularies, but we're letting their imagination unfold and not pushing it in an academic way. There's a misconception that because of this, Waldorf schools are anti-reading. This could not be further from the truth. I'll talk about that in a further episode. It just comes later. A lot of children aren't ready to read in the early childhood years. Their brains need to be ready to do the decoding work, and that happens at different ages for different children. So we just let it unfold in time, just as a child learns to walk without us giving them walking lessons. Another aspect that makes Waldorf unique is the emphasis on storytelling. Starting in the early years, teachers tell stories by heart. I prefer to say by heart rather than memorize, which is a little colder. But we learn the story, we tell it with eye contact, heart to heart, teacher to child. And throughout the grades, storytelling continues in the grade school. When children are studying history or legends, they're still hearing stories told by heart from their grade school teacher. It makes subjects come alive. Another interesting aspect of Waldorf education, and it's the first thing I remember ever hearing about Waldorf education that made me want to learn more, was that the arts are integrated into all subjects. Now, coming from a theater background myself and being a creative person, this really piqued my interest and appealed to me. I thought if I had had that kind of education, how much richer my own schooling experience would have been. And examples of this are when children, a class is studying a subject, it might be that one subject might be approached through movement. It could be clapping games. They're drawing, creating art, painting, drawing that subject. My son Harper, who's now grown, was just sharing with me recently how learning math this way and color, he learned math and numbers through color, and each number had a color associated with it. So what's interesting about this approach, you may have heard of Howard Gardner and his theory of multiple intelligences. Well, Rudolf Steiner, many decades earlier in the 1920s, prescribed this way of learning, approaching different subjects through different arts, which reaches all those different kinds of learners. The kinesthetic learners learn through movement, through maybe learning math, through clapping and stomping games. Visual learners will learn by creating art in their main lesson books, which I'll talk more about in a minute, and so on. Another thing that makes Waldorf education unique is that ideally, a class teacher will stay with the same group of children from first grade through 8th grade. Doesn't always work out that way, but that's the ideal. And a lot of parents who are new to this idea question it. Well, what if you have a bad teacher? I'm not going to lie, and it does happen occasionally, but more often, the kinds of teachers who are drawn to Waldorf education are so dedicated, and the group becomes a family, and that teacher becomes an expert in those children and knows how they learn. Traditionally, when you change year by year, grade by grade, teacher by teacher, the teacher spends the better part of a year just getting to learn and know your child and how they learn and how to reach them. And maybe just when they're making progress, the child goes on to another teacher. The other benefit I see to this is the class teacher always has to stay one step ahead of the children. They might spend their summer learning the subjects they're going to be teaching in the upcoming grade, which makes it fresh for them. They're learning too, and convey that enthusiasm for the subject with the children and learning together with the children. And now more and more public schools and mainstream schools are incorporating this idea of looping, they call it, of one teacher staying with a group of children for multiple grades. One thing I should add about that, in early childhood, in kindergarten, the kindergarten teacher stays with the younger children, but once they get to grade school, they'll have a class teacher who moves up with them grade by grade. And finally, there are no textbooks used in Waldorf education. Instead, children make their own textbooks called main lesson books. Now, a main lesson, and this is another thing that makes it unique, children, instead of having several subjects in a day, will have one main lesson block for typically 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a month long, studying one subject. In 6th grade, it might be Roman history. In 2nd grade, it might be legends and heroes. But they will study that one block for about 2 hours every morning when they're at their freshest, and then take those lessons and write and illustrate their own textbook, which makes it so much more meaningful, helps it go in at a deeper level where they're really thinking about the subject, and it's really embedded in their memory for life, rather than just reading a pre-printed textbook written by some textbook author that's quickly read, memorized, and forgotten. So there's so much more that could be said on this subject. This is just my feeble attempt at giving it to you in a nutshell. So if you want to learn more about Waldorf education, and I hope you do, there are lots of great books and resources available. One book, if you're a parent of a young child, that I highly recommend, it was my first introduction to Waldorf education. It's called You Are Your Child's First Teacher, written by my friend and colleague, Rahima Baldwin Dancy, no relation. It's a great introduction to the early years with ideas for how to incorporate Waldorf into your home. And I will do a future video on how you can bring Waldorf education into your home if you're not able to send your child to a Waldorf school, or if you don't live near one. And also the website of OSNA, the Association of Waldorf Schools of North America, has a great website, lots of links to resources, lots of information. You'll find that at waldorfeducation.org. You might also want to check out waldorfshop.net, which has a lot of resources to books and resources, art supplies, toys, everything, anything related to Waldorf education. So hope that helps. I'll be back talking more about Waldorf related subjects and other parenting and play subjects in future videos. So don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel, and I'll see you next time. Have a day full of play.
Brilliant. So this is, I'm quite close to this subject personally, because of course this was my childhood. And although I understand perfectly what she means by all of that, I was hoping for something more historical, something like the one we watched before. Let's see if I can find something else. No. Oh, the Montessori, it's again I think a third similar type of educational of school. I actually knew of the Montessori before I've learned of the Scuola di Reggio Emilia. So in a sense, they are always compared I'm gonna watch this one because I actually don't know the specifics of it. In general, the purpose of this research into education is, in fact, on how to communicate art language to the public, or art language to those who are not artists or don't have an interest in art history or art education. But I think that the role of the artist is that to bridge these experiences conveyed through art methodologies and making processes, conversation-based processes, to those people who could potentially benefit from them, is an offer of a different type of lens through which experience a different topic, to experience emotions, to experience in general life. Because I think, maybe especially because art was one of my tools of learning as a child through the Waldorf school, I've always placed that one as a tool of learning and a tool of expression, not in an egocentristic way as of artists making objects or making artworks to be looked at. I'm not saying that this is incorrect, but it's not what I feel my role as an artist is in this moment in my life. So yeah, done. Blubbering again. Just let's look at the Montessori vs Waldorf education. Again, I have never seen any of these videos. I am very kind of brave in watching content. I'm not sure, you know, I am a visual learner. So first of all, I need to watch something. Then if I'm interested in exploring the topic more, I am able, I've got the keys of learning to then go and read a book. This is my way of approaching almost anything. If I am able to find even historians or philosophers or whoever, I just need to listen to somebody talking about it so that I can then fully understand the topic.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For those who are new, hi, I'm Daria and I'm glad you're here. So today I'm going to talk about the differences between Montessori and Waldorf educational approach. Before I explain in depth both systems, I'm going to tell you right off the bat the differences that I noticed are in Montessori, the main focus is on individualism and that the child is self-sufficient and independent. And in Waldorf, it's more about teamwork and art and music and learning together rather than individual work. And in Montessori, it's called work, the play. And activities are called work, and in Waldorf everything is a play and everything is based on imagination and creativity. Maria Montessori was a medical doctor and anthropologist who opened the first Casa dei Bambini, not school but a house of children, in Rome in Italy in 1907. Rudolf Steiner founded a Waldorf school in Stuttgart in Germany in 1919 for the children of factory workers of Waldorf Astoria Cigarette Company at the request of company's director. So first, I will mention some similarities between Montessori and Waldorf educational approach. They both have flexible curriculum. Neither Montessori nor Waldorf schools have a made-to-order curriculum. Students can choose their own activities and tasks with the guidance from a teacher. They can also mostly work at their own pace. Second similarity is decentralized learning. Montessori and Waldorf teachers rarely give lectures. Students are free to move around the classroom. They can work independently or in groups, however they choose, and pursue their interests. Similarity number 3 is holistic education. Both Montessori and Waldorf schools aim to educate the whole child. In addition to core academics, they place lots of emphasis on learning practical skills, developing the right character traits, and learning important values, moral values. Similarity number 4, concrete learning. They both emphasize concrete learning. Children work a lot with their hands and they learn a lot of practical skills. Montessori is especially focused on these practical skills. Similarity number 5, they both use very natural materials, no plastic. They restrict the use of technology. Now I'm going to tell you about main differences with Montessori and Waldorf. Montessori schools, they focus more on academics, at least in preschool. In Waldorf schools, they don't introduce the core academics until the age of 7, first or second grade. Difference number 2, work and play. Like I said in the beginning, Montessori is more focused on work. They call activities, they call them work rather than play. In Waldorf schools, children are encouraged to play and explore and create imaginary worlds and fantasies. Montessori educators tend to discourage pretend play. Maybe they don't discourage it, but at least they're not encouraging it. But as I said, in Waldorf schools, the pretend play and imaginary worlds are the main focus, and this is how they learn, at least in preschool. Difference number 3, the arts. Waldorf schools infuse the arts throughout their curriculum. Music, drama, dancing, visual arts, and other artistic media are a big part of many lessons. In Montessori, it's more about what is useful and practical, and these activities in everyday life and not in an imaginary world. It's very concrete. Fourth difference, nature. While both approaches really encourage nature, going into the nature, exploring nature, incorporating nature into the learning, natural materials, but Waldorf is focused on this a bit more than Montessori. The fifth difference is how they are using their methods of teaching. Teachers in Waldorf school, like in traditional school, so teacher is on one side and the kids are on the other side of the classroom, and the lesson is being taught and told by the teacher to the kids. And the kids are all of the same age in each group. But in Montessori school, kids are in groups of from 3 to 6 years old, then from 6 to 9 years old, and then from 9 to 12, and so on. So they're mixed in the groups of 3-year differences. The teacher is individually teaching each child the lesson that they want to learn that day. And older kids are like mentors and teaching younger kids and explaining some stuff to them. It's more like a family or a natural way of how you're going to be dealing in life later. You're not going to be always with the same age people around you. So the kids learn how to talk with older kids, how to treat younger kids. I hope you learned something from this video. I don't think any school is better than the other. I think both of them have great features. I think they both offer a lot. Whichever educational approach you choose, I think your child will benefit from both of these approaches. If you're at home, like what I'm doing, my base is Montessori because I'm teaching my child to do all these practical activities at home, but also I'm not discouraging imaginative play with my toddler. I don't think you should be that strict like they are in school, and you can pick and choose from both approaches. Invent some fluid system of yours. Choose whatever is best for you and your child. I hope this was helpful, and see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Bye.
Right. So of course she was a homeschooling mother, so it seems. So I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, it seems that everything is accurate. It definitely resonates with what I know. And I can only talk about the Waldorf experience. So everything that she said is very much resonating with what I remember of the Waldorf school, especially the connection between arts and nature and play. This is absolutely core. And I think that in a sense, this was very pivotal in the way that I've experienced the world and therefore my art practice as well. So yeah, it's quite quite an interesting sort of place to grow up into. I was always encouraged to explore emotional status and yeah, learning through play. It was very exciting. I never thought that I could miss a day of school because it wasn't the school I then learned. It wasn't the school that many people know of, so that children can be bored or such. I thought that was the second home. Later, when I went to public high school, age 16 till 18, then I've learned why people decide not to go to school or can be bored or can be sort of unwelcoming and not definitely a home-like place. I'm gonna again have a look at the emails, I'm gonna have a look if someone is going to join, and yeah, I will join again in a little while. Hey, yeah, so no one is joining. I think now I am going to watch another video or two about the School of Plato. Because my practice is focused on conversation, I was thinking to mention Plato in my dissertation, which is also about the dialogic practices. But because it's such a short piece of writing, I thought I didn't have enough time to experiment or to mention Plato, because I think it needs just much more space in word counts than a little footnote or something. So anyways, right now I wanted just to explore this topic a little bit more and understand my positioning compared to the School of Plato, what I think of it, and how I can borrow some tools from this philosopher. So again, I will share my screen. I think this is it. And this is a video selected before. So let's have a look.
Athens, 2,400 years ago. It's a compact place. Only about 250,000 people live here. There are fine baths, theatres, temples, shopping arcades, and gymnasiums. It's warm for more than half the year. This is also home to the world's first true and probably greatest philosopher, Plato. Born into a prominent and wealthy family in the city, Plato devoted his life to one goal, helping people to reach a state of what he termed eudaimonia, or fulfillment. Plato is often confused with Socrates. Socrates was an older friend who taught Plato a lot but didn't write any books. Plato wrote lots of them, 36, all dialogues, beautifully crafted scripts of imaginary discussions in which Socrates is always allotted a starring role, among them the Republic, the Symposium, the Laws, the Meno, and the Apology. Plato had 4 big ideas for making life more fulfilled. First big idea, think more. We rarely give ourselves time to think carefully and logically about our lives and how to lead them. Sometimes we just go along with what the Greeks called doxa, or popular opinions. In the 36 books he wrote, Plato showed this common sense to be riddled with errors, prejudice, and superstition. Fame is great, follow your heart, money is the key to a good life. The problem is, popular opinions edge us towards the wrong values, careers, and relationships. Plato's answer is, know yourself. It means doing a special kind of therapy, philosophy, subjecting your ideas to examination rather than acting on impulse. If you strengthen your self-knowledge, you don't get so pulled around by feelings. Plato compared the role of our feelings to being dragged dangerously along by a group of wild horses. In honor of his mentor and friend Socrates, This kind of examination is called a Socratic discussion. You can have it with yourself, or ideally with another person who isn't trying to catch you out, but wants to help you clarify your own ideas. Second big idea, let your lover change you. That sounds weird if you think that love means finding someone who wants you just the way you are. In a symposium, Plato's play about a dinner party where a group of friends drink too much and get talking about love, sex, and relationships, Plato says, true love is admiration. In other words, the person you need to get together with should have very good qualities which you yourself lack. Let's say they should be really brave or organized or warm and sincere. By getting close to this person, you can become a little like they are. The right person for us helps us grow to our full potential. For Plato, in a good relationship, a couple shouldn't love each other exactly as they are right now. They should be committed to educating each other and to enduring the stormy passages this inevitably involves. Each person should want to seduce the other into becoming a better version of themselves. 3. Decode the message of beauty. Everyone pretty much likes beautiful things, but Plato was the first to ask, why do we like them? He found a fascinating reason. Beautiful objects are whispering important truths to us about the good life. We find things beautiful when we unconsciously sense in them qualities we need but are missing in our lives. Gentleness, harmony, balance, peace, strength. Beautiful objects, therefore, have a really important function. They help to educate our souls. Ugliness is a serious matter too. It parades dangerous and damaged characteristics in front of us. It makes it harder to be wise, kind, and calm. Plato sees art as therapeutic. It's the duty of poets and painters, and nowadays novelists, TV producers, and designers to help us to live good lives. 4. Reform society. Plato spent a lot of time thinking how the government and society should ideally be. He was the world's first utopian thinker. In this, he was inspired by Athens' great rival, Sparta. This was a city-sized machine for turning out great soldiers. Everything the Spartans did, how they raised their children, how their economy was organized, whom they admired, how they had sex, what they ate, was tailored to that one goal. And Sparta was hugely successful from a military point of view. But that wasn't Plato's concern. He wanted to know, how could a society get better at producing not military power, but fulfilled people? In his book, The Republic, Plato identifies a number of changes that should be made. Athenian society was very focused on the rich, like the louche aristocrat Alcibiades, and sports celebrities like the boxer Milo of Croton. Plato wasn't impressed. It really matters who we admire, because celebrities influence our outlook, ideas, and conduct, and bad heroes give glamour to flaws of character. Plato therefore wanted to give Athens new celebrities, replacing the current crop with ideally wise and good people he called guardians, models for everyone's good development. These people would be distinguished by their record of public service, their modesty and simple habits, their dislike of the limelight, and their wide and deep experience. They would be the most honored and admired people in society. He also wanted to end democracy in Athens. He wasn't crazy. He just observed how few people think properly before they vote, and therefore we get very substandard rulers. He didn't want to replace democracy with a horrid dictatorship, but he wanted to prevent people from voting until they'd started to think rationally. That is, until they'd become philosophers. Otherwise, government would just be a kind of mob rule. To help the process, Plato started a school, the Academy, in Athens, which lasted a good 300 years. There, pupils learned not just maths and spelling, but also how to be good and kind. His ultimate goal was that politicians should become philosophers. The world will not be right, he said, until kings become philosophers or philosophers kings.
Fulfilling already, I think. Very interesting. I've studied Plato when I was in high school. Hey everybody, it's Tony. Ages ago, so I didn't quite remember much. But I am interested to know more. So instead of recording my research, which could be random and actually, you know what? Let's do it. Maybe there is a part 2 to what we just watched. let's see. I really like this way of presenting theories or ideology of things that we can't see anymore. Very quite visual. I really enjoy that. Okay, so it seems that you've made quite a few. So I'm compiling a list of all the things I've been watching today, so I can make a useful link. Let's watch this one.
Asking oneself and others what the perfect version of something is, the ideal version, might sound like a strange idea. What is the perfect marriage, or career, or system of government, or school? It can feel immature and naive to bother much with such questions. They're just daydreams. After all, who cares about ideal versions? We might as well deal with what we've got. But the great ancient Greek philosopher Plato strenuously disagrees with this. Throughout his work, he argues that focusing on the ideal version of something is one of the most useful kinds of thought exercises we can generate. It's by knowing what we think something should be like that we can more clearly start to define what might be wrong and focus on what we need to do to make the world slightly better. When he was talking about ideals, Plato used a slightly strange but ultimately rather useful word, the forms. So he asked not what is the ideal friendship or the ideal kind of parental love, he asked what is the form of friendship or the form of parental love. It does sound strange, but what he had in mind was something very practical. When a Greek stonemason was carving an ornament, they wouldn't just make it up themselves. They'd make use of a wooden template or form to check if they were getting it right. The form itself was made by the master, but if the mason possessed the form, they could more reliably do perfect work. This is Plato's basic picture of what an ideal is. It's the guide you need that shows you how to do something well yourself. If you've got possession of the form, you can be guided towards a true goal. A form, as Plato sees it, is a blueprint, a set of instructions for making a very good version of something. That's why we all need a well-thought-through set of forms to guide us in life. And unsurprisingly, it is philosophy that can guide us to these forms. So, for example, the form of friendship is a mental model of what a really good friendship actually involves. And if you grasp this model, if this idea is active in your mind, you will know how to be a good friend. Similarly, having a form of education in mind is going to be very useful for the teacher. It'll stop her being buffeted by events and day-to-day pressures. She'll be able to keep in mind where, ideally, she should be going. We've typically thought of ideals as fantasy projections that blithely ignore most of what life is actually like. We think of them as the opposite of being realistic. But Plato sees an ideal as the result of a deep understanding and careful engagement with reality. Someone setting up an airport would need, in the Platonic scheme, to have in mind the ideal air traffic control system, something optimally effective, efficient, and safe. This is the person who would, in Plato's terms, have grasped the form of air traffic control. We all need to have as many forms in mind as we possibly can. Plato is breaking the habitual assumption that searching for the ideal is at odds with getting things done in the rough and tumble of the real world. And he's pushing us to be more exacting about where we are trying to head to. If an ideal seems utterly distant and hopeless, maybe the problem isn't that it's too idealistic, but in a strange but important way, actually not idealistic enough. That is, we've not quite yet discovered the form. We shouldn't abandon our ideals. We should get more ambitious about them, and Plato's philosophy is on hand to help us.
Nice. This is actually quite optimistic. And in a sense, I can relate to this in my practice already. Because in a sense, in my research of dialogical, so those type of social engaged projects based around conversation and verbal exchange, of course, there is a certain desire, both at the beginning and for the conclusion of the project. In this case, through Wombenhood, for example, is to give the opportunity not just for me to discuss, explore and understand menstruality and where the taboos come from, to give the possibility for people to share personal experiences on this topic. And the aim, one of those, is to create something of a group, an idea of a community space where to create these new ways of reading the topic, for then if the group, if these people coming together find a way to maybe bring some kind of change in the way we live, in our personal lives, sort of home culture. It could be a slight change for us as individuals. For example, say that maybe in my family there isn't much discussion around menstruation and there is no verbalization around this, about the pain or about the help that is needed from me, menstrual, to, for example, a masculine presence in the family. There is this awkwardness of talking about the tampons, of the pads, maybe forgetting them in the bathroom, as I am certain many menstruals have done in their lives. It's not something done to poke others, but it's a forgetting an action. Yeah. And in a sense, by talking about how could the world be if we were able to discuss about menstruation with a certain freedom, without the veil of shame, of taboo, of awkwardness, of physical disgust and repulsion, there could be another world, another place, another way of understanding the topic and reading the topic, which as a form, it could be understanding that this is a natural thing that happens in the body of those who can experience menstruations, and is not linked to, as they believed, as we watched at the beginning of this session today, is not linked to the change of tides, therefore the potential killing of people in the sea. It's not a curse. I don't think that this is a curse, because it's directly linked to fertility and to giving birth. So yeah, interesting. It's still a little bit, the words that I'm using are not academic by any means. And one thing that I am really focusing on is to, one of the actions that I wish to do to bridge the arts to the society, the arts to the public, or the audience as it's called, is to avoid using terminologies that are absolutely barriers rather than enhancing conversations. An example that before I joined university, I've been into many galleries, exhibitions and such. And when I was handed the press release that introduced the exhibition, I couldn't understand absolutely what they were saying in many circumstances. And I think this is one of the problems that I, as a person interested in art, I've experienced, this incommunicability. And I don't know if this is because of this desire of being academic, or to use terms that are particularly proper for the work of art to be discussed and described. But I think, at least in this practice of mine, in this experience, in this exploration of a topic, I want to be accessible. I want this topic to be clear, to be accessible for people, even for young people, if they're interested in talking about it. Right, it's 4:45. I think I'm going to watch the last video of Plato, or one more video of of Plato, because I'm very interested in this. And so we watched this on the Library of the Cave. I love the story. Right, I think let's see if we've got time to watch them both.
The ancient Greeks were emphatic that philosophy was not just an elaborate, abstract exercise. It was, they felt, a deeply useful skill that should be learned and practiced by all in order to help us to live and die well. No one believed this more than Plato, who was passionate in his defense of philosophy as a kind of therapy for the soul. One of the most forceful stories he told on behalf of the utility of philosophy was what has become known as the allegory of the cave. It is perhaps the most famous allegory in philosophy. This was a story that was intended, as he wrote, to compare the effect of education and the lack of it on our nature. At the start of Book 7 of his masterpiece, The Republic, Plato tells us about some people living imprisoned in a cave. They've always lived there and don't know anything of the outside world. There is no natural light in this cave. The walls are damp and dark. All the inhabitants can see comes from the shadows of things thrown up on the wall by a light of a fire. The cave dwellers get fascinated by these reflections of animals, plants, and people. Moreover, they assume that these shadows are real and that if you pay a lot of attention to them, you'll understand and succeed in life. They don't, of course, realize that they are looking at mere phantoms. They chat about shadowy things enthusiastically and take great pride in their sophistication and wisdom. Then one day, quite by chance, someone discovers a way out of the cave, out into the open air. At first, it's simply overwhelming. He is dazzled by the brilliant sunshine, in which everything is for the first time properly illuminated. Gradually, his eyes adjust and he encounters the true forms of all those things which he had formerly known only as shadows. He sees actual flowers, the colors of birds, the nuances in the bark of trees. He observes stars and grasps the vastness and sublime nature of the universe. As Plato puts it in solemn terms, previously he had been looking merely at phantoms. Now he is nearer to the true nature of being. Out of compassion, this newly enlightened man decides to leave the sunlit upper world and makes his way back into the cave to try to help out his companions, who are still mired in confusion and error. Because he's become used to the bright upper world, he can hardly see anything underground. He stumbles along the damp, wet corridors and gets confused. He seems to the others totally unimpressive. When he in turn is unimpressed by them and insists on explaining what the sun is or what a real tree is like, the cave dwellers get sarcastic, then very angry, and eventually plot to kill him. The story of the cave is an allegory of the life of all enlightened people. The cave dwellers are humans before philosophy. The sun is the light of reason. The alienation of the returned philosopher is what all truth-tellers can expect when they take their knowledge back to people who have not devoted themselves to thinking. For Plato, we are all for much of our lives in shadow. Many of the things we get excited about, like fame, the perfect partner, a high-status job, are infinitely less real than we suppose. They are, for the most part, phantoms projected by our culture onto the walls of our fragile and flawed minds. But because everyone around us is insisting that they are genuine, we are taken in from a young age. It's not our fault individually. No one chooses to be in the cave. That's just where we happen to begin. We're all starting from a very difficult place. If, like the man in Plato's story, you bluntly tell people they're wrong, you get nowhere. You cause deep offense and may endanger your own life. Athens had, after all, recently put Socrates, Plato's friend, to death. Plato knew from close experience just what the cave dwellers might do to those who claim to know the sun. The solution, Plato says, is a process of widespread, carefully administered philosophical education, by which he understood the method of inquiry pioneered by Socrates and known to us as the Socratic method. It's a very gentle process. You don't lecture or harangue or force someone to read a particular book. You just start with a general declaration of intellectual modesty. No one knows very much. It's always good to insist. And wisdom starts with owning up to ignorance. Confess that you don't know exactly what the government should do, what war is meant to achieve, or how good relationships work. You then get the other person to say what they think, and gradually, together, you investigate the answers. Most likely, the other person will be confident, or rather painfully, overconfident. They may tell you it's all quite simple, really, and everyone knows the answer already. You must be supremely patient with this kind of bravado. If they go off topic, you must cheerfully double back. You must take a lot of time and be ready to have chats over many days. This method of talking is founded on a lovely confidence that with the right encouragement, people can eventually work out things for themselves and detect errors in their own reasoning if you carefully and quietly draw their attention to tricky points and don't cast blame or ever get annoyed. You never teach anyone anything by making them feel stupid, even if they are at first. We have all started in that cave, but it is Plato's deepest insight that we don't have to stay there. And the road out is called, quite simply, philosophy. This is the sun whose light we can follow, and by whose rays the proper nature of things can become clear. If you enjoy the films on this channel, you might want to hear about another smart, insightful channel we love called Wisecrack. Click here to visit their channel page and discover a succession of videos on world literature, philosophy, cinema, history, and more, all delivered with a playful, beguiling sense of humor. They're in LA, we're here in London, but the School of Life and Wisecrack have become firm friends based around shared values about making education compelling. We'd love you to befriend us both in turn.
Bless them. I think I might do. Okie dokie. So it's 10 to 5. I think I'm just going to, I don't know if I can do a little recap, if I will be able to. So today my intention was to take this time, should have been alone as it happened to be, take this time to do some research focused on this dialogue-based practice. And I had a list of things to do, things I wanted to look at, being the listening to a podcast about menstruation and endometriosis, which we did. Then I wanted to learn a little bit more about the Scuola di Reggio Emilia, and consecutively we watched a bit about the Waldorf school, and the Montessori school. And after that, I was thinking to look at Plato and his school of teaching, focused on conversation, which in all of these cases, I wanted to see if I could borrow some tools to implement in my practice based on dialogue and conversation. Of course, this is a way of learning for me. So this video here, this recording, is a look into the way I approach my dialogue-based conversation, how I research the topic in a very much general way, because as I've said, I'm a visual learner, so I have to, for my own clarity of mind, to watch and to listen something before adventuring myself in reading an academic text, which gets much easier to understand after this visual impact on a topic. So yeah, I hope next time someone might join. I understand that life is not always possible to join at this type of sessions, but by no means I will keep doing this. I am considering maybe to shorten up a little bit should someone not be present, because 2 hours is quite a long time spent to look at my own practice in this way. But I'm going to give it a few more times just to understand how these sessions need to be adjusted. All right, so this is it, experiment number 1. It's much more of a visual research / vodcast / conversation to myself in this very instance, but I hope it could be enjoyable for others as well. And see you next time. Bye, everyone.